Morning, everyone. Well, first of all, it is a pleasure to be out here. Are there any other millennials in here? Nice. Okay. Sweet. All right. Perfect. So, I'm usually, I think some of you guys know when you hear the word millennial, I'm usually the youngest one wherever I go speak at. So, it is a true honor to be here. I've heard about this conference. I'm familiar with it. When Dan messaged me on LinkedIn and he called me to talk, there was no hesitation in my voice. And this is a unique topic to talk about, right? When you hear the word millennial, usually the first action that people do is a huge eye roll, right? For some other reason. But being a medical device sales recruiter, specializing in placing reps as associate sales reps and full line sales reps in medical companies, most of the reps that I happen to place are millennials. So what I talked to Dan about was that I wanted to do a topic why working with millennials is so important and how we can all benefit going forward. So here's the clicker. So I have an agenda that we're going to go over for everything, and then at the end we'll open it up for questions. But I kind of wanted to share a little bit about my story, who I am, where I've been, what I've done, and really what I see as the future going forward for working with millennials. So, and right here, this is my new book. It's called A Millennial's Guide to Breaking into Medical Device Sales. It's basically a how-to guide for any recent college graduate, any person that's looking to get into, sales in general, hardcore sales, especially medical device sales. So, first, just a little bit about my background. So I'm born and raised out here in Orange County, California. I grew up in Irvine. I did have the privilege and the pleasure of playing college basketball. It actually was at the University of Arizona, not ASU. But so I was I served as my team's ambassador for 4 years. Most of the guys I backed up are in the NBA now, and they have no clue what it takes to get into hardcore sales. But what I did was I learned how to help out students in the community in Tucson from 2005 to 2009. But the biggest thing that I learned when I was in college, and I've learned to apply this to being a sales recruiter now, is the art of competition and really how to compete on a daily basis and bring it out of every candidate that goes into the interview process. Because let's face it, when you're going in for a sales job, what's the hardest thing to sell? It's yourself. Products, services, they need people to get behind it and push. But when you're selling yourself to an employer like a Medtronic, these Fortune 100 medical companies, even a startup company, I noticed there were some startup presentations in here today. The hardest thing to sell is yourself, and you have to compete to sell yourself. And I learned that being an athlete. And so currently right now I am leading sales coach and recruiter for the medical device industry. I'm one of the top 1% in terms of recruiters on LinkedIn. I take a lot of pride in that because I love genuinely helping people, prepping people, coaching people in the interview process and helping them win medical device sales jobs. So when you think of millennials, the big question I have to everyone is, and I think a lot of people want to know, is who are we? What do we stand for? And if you notice, there's a lot of bold words. There's two different sides of the spectrum, right? There's the non-millennial opinion, and then there's the opinion that we have as millennials. But before I break that down, I want to go over some numbers that'll kind of put things in perspective for everyone too. So, it's 2017 right now. If you look, by 2020, and I talk about this in my book as well, is that 50% of the US workforce is going to be millennial. That's just in 2.5 years from now. That's how fast time is flying by. It's already going to be 2018 next year, and before you know it, that number is going to come to fruition. By 2025, it's going to jump 25%, and it's going to be 75% millennial in the workforce. So what that means is that we have our work cut out for us as a generation. I look at it as an exciting challenge. Like I said earlier, I do place primarily a lot of millennials in medical sales. But that number, 75% by 2025, means that my generation is going to outweigh the other generations in terms of taking over the workforce. Some of these reps that we placed they're going to be managers and sales directors and VPs. A medical manager told me at a Fortune 300 company the other day, he said he got scared when he heard that. And he said, because he's like, I'm so nervous that millennials are actually going to take over and someone's coming for my job, and I said, hey, that's the reality. Things evolve. But I look at it as a fun challenge. I think that, like I said, we have our work cut out for us in terms of the future of where we're going, what's going to happen with us as sales reps. But the big question is, how do we get better? How do we get on the same page? I think it's an exciting time right now. If you look at things, and some of the other presenters have touched on this earlier, emerging technologies such as analytics and cloud and the Internet of Things, apps and medical software make it so much easier to communicate now. Things are moving at a faster pace. And being a millennial, that's what we like to do, is move at a fast pace. So I think that because of the technology that people in this room are developing and are coming up with, it's going to be exciting for my generation of millennials to embrace that and take it and run with it. And this study was conducted by the Boston Consulting Group, I think in 2014 or 2015. So, okay, so this is a continuation pretty much of who are we as millennials. So non-millennials view, and again, these are just a couple of the words that I put, I'm sure you guys have your own words too, but non-millennials view us as lazy, entitled, and independent. That's usually what I hear primarily when I'm at meetings with managers, with VPs, or when I'm talking to managers and decision makers over the phone. If you look at how millennials view millennials, we view each other as innovative, diverse, and non-trusting. So these 6 words are pretty unique, right? But I want to go over the non-millennial view first. So a lot of people think that millennials are lazy because we don't work as hard at our job. We're expecting a paycheck because maybe we heard something that our friend's uncle made a couple $100,000 more in a different time period as a rep, and we think that the money's just going to come in and everything's just going to flow. A lot of people think we're entitled. I'm sure you hear things sometimes across the news of participation trophies, that millennials want an award just for showing up or just for being an employee. I don't know when that started, but I was curious to kind of learn about that myself. And then the other word is independent. I think this comes from where managers will think, primarily managers and VPs will think, these millennials are so independent, where if things go wrong, they'll just take off and leave. They won't ever, really give the job a chance. The corporate code or the corporate structure isn't for millennials. So now if you look at the millennial view of how we view each other, and again, these are 2 different sides of the spectrum here, you hear other millennials saying that we're more innovative, we're more diverse, and we're more non-trusting. And I always go back to, how did we get here? How did we get to this point? Going back to the innovative word, if you look at the technology, look at social media. I mean, how many people in here have kids that have Snapchat and Instagram and Twitter? And you look at who are developing apps like this. For the most part, it's millennials. They're coming up with new technologies that we can all utilize. And going back to the diverse part, nothing just happens anymore in this country. We become part of a global landscape. You can connect with someone now in England or in Europe within the click of a button that says follow. Whether it's on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, any other social media platform that you can think of, the world is expanding, and millennials are helping expand that world. That's what makes our generation so diverse. And it's trickling down into sales, too. I can't tell you how many resumes and how many emails and LinkedIn messages I get from reps in South America. I got an email the other day, actually, from a rep in Japan. He wants to be a Capital Medical rep. And I've never placed someone outside of Canada before, so that's as far internationally as I've gone. But the world is expanding, especially in terms of sales, and especially with millennials. And then non-trusting. I thought that was a unique word that other millennials describe each other as. I think this word non-trusting, I look at it, it started in 2008. You guys all remember when the economy crashed. I was actually a senior in college when that happened. I was heading into my senior year at U of A, and I remember I was taking economics classes, political science classes. I was talking to countless academic advisors of, hey, what advice do you have getting into the workforce when I get out of here? And usually people were quick to put a game plan together, but what we all heard was good luck, because the world was changing because of the economy. And when everything went downhill, we all kind of looked at each other, but there was a couple advisors that said, if you get into hardcore sales, that's where you can make a great name for yourself. especially medical. So that's where I kind of got my first taste of medical device sales as a senior in college. But the non-trusting factor comes from, I really think, in my opinion of millennials, it comes from that 2008, about 9 years ago until now. Millennials we're a unique bunch, right? We're not as quick to trust people, because of that. So, okay, so how do we handle millennials? So when I'm going through this with candidates, when I'm prepping them for jobs, when I'm prepping them to out-hustle the competition, that's really what it comes down to. There's a word in particular that I always talk about, and the word is care. And I'll break down the acronym here in a sec, but as millennials in sales, you have to care about every aspect of what you're doing. I think that there's a little bit of a communication breakdown between decision makers that from another generation and my generation of millennials. So it all comes back to these millennials don't care. These millennials are lazy. Lazy is derived from someone that doesn't care. So, thinking about this, and seeing what I've seen as a medical device sales recruiter, I think that, and this is my opinion, I believe that if we learn to care as millennials, it starts with us. It starts with us looking at each other in the mirror, looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, okay, how do we care to get better every day at our job? How do we care to get better in the interview process? How do we care, how do we care more to impress the employer that we're working for, to embrace the product or service we're getting behind and pushing? Because let's face it, if you see one of these startup presentations for a device and you're risking and sacrificing and you're going to a device company that's a startup company, you have to care a lot more, because that company's going to sink or swim based on the sales that are made. But the acronym, basically, here's what everything stands for. It's competitiveness, attitude, relentless, and expectation. Competitive, again, it's really learning how to compete to win at all levels, not just as a rep, but as a candidate, before you even get into the interview process. One of the biggest things that I stress to reps over the phone is that a medical device sales interview is not just another interview. That's why 80% of millennial candidates, they don't even make it past the HR phone screen, because they don't care, and they don't know how to compete. And one thing that I always stress to them is that, hey, you got to treat that HR manager the same way that you would treat, a shareholder from Medtronic or a shareholder from Stryker. They're just as important. And then it comes down to also having the right attitude, right? If you have the right attitude, if you bring that every day, you bring that winning mentality, then it becomes a domino effect. And, really everything starts to fall in place and it starts to fall in line. You have to be willing to get better every single day, at your job, whatever it is, especially in medical device, because like we've heard earlier today, the technology is changing so fast, and you have to be ready for that. And being relentless. You have to be relentless in the pursuit of being a great candidate, being a great sales rep. Don't just be satisfied with getting an interview with a startup company or a Fortune 100 company. Be relentless and don't just be satisfied with winning the job, but be relentless. Go be that top performing sales rep. Go be that top dog at a company that you are capable of being. And a lot of times managers and VPs will say, well, these reps will quit when things get tough. They'll leave after 6 months as opposed to staying for 3 to 5 years and really building something. And so that's kind of, we have to, as a proud millennial, we have to take that as a challenge, and we have to right that ship. We have to do a better job of righting that ship and understanding that, hey, if we apply these principles to what these managers are saying, we'll be in great shape. And then the expectation part, right? We have to have realistic expectations going forward of what's going to be in this medical company that we're signing up for. I hear all the time over the phone, a candidate that just graduated college 2 years ago saying, hey, my uncle was a device rep, and he minimum was making 400, 500 grand 20 years ago. And I immediately cut them off. I'm going to say, that's not you right now. You got to go in with the realistic expectation that you have to put your head down and grind. You have to put your head down and put in those long hours, and you have to genuinely care about what these managers are going to be pointing you to do. Because we heard it today. I remember one of the presenters talked about it earlier, is that when you have these big companies, they don't put you in a position to fail. They put you in a position to be successful, especially the Fortune 100 companies. And even these startup companies with these devices, they're going to put you in the best position possible to be successful. But I really genuinely believe, because I see this every day over the phone, is that if we start to care more, I think that'll definitely help us right the ship, and I think the communication will get better between our generation of millennials and the generations ahead of us that are VPs, decision makers, managers, or regional sales directors, et cetera, et cetera. So, but to me, that's the big key to handling all this, is really starting with us and us caring enough to get on the same page that what you guys and with all the decision makers in the room have to offer, and it becomes a domino effect from there. So I wanted to open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to help answer anything from my end. So yeah. Well, I think if you ask any average millennial, I think that right now, I think we live more in a world of likes and followers and status updates and social media than actually like making money and wanting to take that next step of our life. But I think the one thing that I think millennials want to know is that there's trust. There's trust between the employer and the rep. And that I would say trust in long-term growth. That's why I see either when millennials will take a job or not take a job, they'll say, hey, I don't trust the manager. And I tell them, I say, you can't go off of one interview. You have to go through the entire process. Because I think it's different than it was, even 10 years ago. It's different than it was 20 years ago. You're not just going to fall in line anymore and make 250, 300 grand. You really have to put your head down and bust your butt 12 hours a day to do that. But to answer your question, I think the two biggest things that I think millennials care about the most is having that trust factor between the company and the employee, and then obviously the room for growth. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've screened probably over a few thousand in the last few years. And so mostly about 80% of the reps that I place in medical and in sales jobs in general are millennials. I would say it's a healthy mix of both. Because a lot of the people that I've been placing lately are about 2 years removed from school. And so I do a pretty thorough job of screening them pretty well before I send them off to a manager. And I usually try to highlight like, hey, this is what Dave or so-and-so is looking for before we actually get them in there. But yeah, I've talked to thousands of these reps and primarily millennials across the country. Yeah. Yeah, I think the mentality has changed a little bit. I think because, and this is what I see. I want to ask a question, and I want to get back to what you said. So how many people in here have a son, a cousin, a daughter on like Instagram or any of those social media apps, right? I know there's more. Don't be afraid to admit it. Okay, so there's a majority in the room. So I think a lot of these apps like Twitter and Instagram, I think you see people making money off them now, like modeling and doing things like that. And someone's son or daughter thinks, I can do that too. I don't have to go put on a suit and go work for an employer. I can go model at the beach in front of a surfboard and make 10 grand. And it's a very what's the word I'm looking for? It's false expectations. And because for every person that's, for the 1 or 2 people that are making money like that, there's thousands and thousands of young millennials that are not working. I believe our generation is the most in debt right now. Because what I noticed a popular trend right now to do too is when a millennial doesn't find a job, they wind up going back to school. So to get another type of degree. So, yeah. So I think being a millennial, that helps me a lot. Having that Fortune, 200 sales training also helps a lot too. I think when I engage with them, I think being an athlete helps a lot too. But I think that we all kind of went through the same grind. We all kind of went through the same type of trenches. So, and you know how it is. When you're selling something, if you can relate to somebody and you can build a rapport with someone in the first 30 seconds, you got them like this. You got them eating out of the palm of your hand. So for me personally, I always try to build a rapport with whoever I'm talking to. If I know someone that went to the university they went from, if I know someone on LinkedIn they're connected with, that's usually how I operate. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think things are getting a little more exposed now because of social media, but I also think it's just a generational gap too. That's what it comes down to. But with any generational gap, it starts with people from the current generation to look at themselves and say, hey, how do we get better so the other generation doesn't judge us? So I got time for one more, and then I know I got to wrap it up. Yeah, I would have the boomer reps mentor the millennial reps because I think you have to learn from someone. And I think that people get weary of being a mentor to a younger rep because let's face it, with social media, with the power of everything, we live in a copycat world, right? So, if you were to mentor a millennial, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, this guy's going to take my place. But I think that it all stems back to everyone being on the same page. If you know that if you're going to mentor me, and I'm your protege, and you're teaching me the ropes of the company, and you're teaching me how to get better, I'm going to be like a sponge and absorb everything, put my own spin on it, and then start selling and start hustling. I think it's more of a simple formula than people are actually doing. I think they're putting too much emphasis on, hey, this guy or girl is coming to take my job, and so I don't feel comfortable doing that. But I think a mentorship program would definitely help. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.